Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychology and Spirituality Bridge to Better Life discussion. I'm here with Peter Hayes. Hi, Peter. Thank you for
Hey,
coming
Marcia.
back and joining us. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Peter, we're here to talk about grief and guilt and forgiveness. And to me, Peter, this is a deep and quite necessary conversation. Some people may find it that is quite dark, right? Why do we have to talk about grief and guilt? My goodness, those are really difficult words and thoughts. But the reason why I've invited you to be here with us is because many of us we feel trapped when we're going through guilt into this notion of replaying our minds the past, and we get really imprisoned by that circular ideation, right, that keeps
Mhm.
replaying, and we don't even know how or when to get out of it. And I just wanted to say that from that perspective, we see some of us, and I've been through a loss of an important person to me recently, and it is very interesting because sometimes those around us go like, Marcia, snap out of it, right? Snap out of it. And while I say grief does not have an expiration date,
No.
um, grief doesn't always move forward. It's those scenarios where it circles around, right? Those moments that become a moment of um, even nostalgia, of sadness, and those scenarios keep being reconstructed. And Peter, I keep thinking in our minds, we start to have questions like, I should have done more. Oh, why didn't I say that? Or what if I had done something or acted differently? And when we think about it, those moments of reflections that are super important,
Mhm.
they really put us in the prison instead of opening the door to very critical notions of moving forward with that relationship. And I think from a psychological perspective, this is it's called rumination, right? Repetitive thinking
Right.
that unfortunately, Peter, doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't address anything, but contrary to a positive, let's move forward, it actually may deepen our sense of suffering. So I wanted to, before we start talking about guilt, I went on deeper, a little bit deeper, and I found out that the reason why we do that rumination, is because our brain, Peter, is wired to seek causality, right?
Okay.
If there is a reason, then I can understand why. So, especially when we go through a traumatic loss, our brain starts to search for any inkling of control. And it's almost as if we told ourselves, if I can find the cause, I can prevent the pain,
Then you
right?
can what? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is exactly in the moments, especially traumatic losses, that when we are processing grief, that logic doesn't work. So, Peter, I'm going to ask you, can we talk about guilt?
Uh, Obviously, divorces and things like that. And it's painful to go through those experiences, obviously, and the guilt can be tremendous. But in the long run, if we use that guilt to try to understand better what occurred, as you mentioned, trying to have more awareness of what happened may mean causality.
Yeah.
Okay, but if we have a better understanding of things that we did to have helped create the scenario of a relationship coming to an end, Do we use that understanding to sort of pinpoint it and therefore everything's fine? Or do we use it to try to avoid repeating that mistake somewhere else? Because those are two different things. If we ruminate, as you
Yes.
mentioned,
Yeah.
over I could have done this, I could have done that, then we get stuck in a loop.
Yeah.
It really is like a treadmill. And the more we do that, it really turns into a form of avoidance. Whereas if we have the courage to understand what did I do to get the reaction that I got from someone else? Did I do anything that really helped create this? Was it conscious? Probably not. Was there something that the person was reacting to? Or was it really that person had some kind of problem that we really didn't have much awareness of, let alone control over? And if that's going on, then maybe we're not, it's very easy for us to say, this is all my fault. You know, it's like what children do. When parents are having trouble, the reaction that children can have is, things are bad between mom and dad and it's all my fault.
Yeah.
And we may do that as adults in a relationship, but what if the person backed off from us, or there was a problem because they too have their own defensiveness in some way? That doesn't mean that we didn't play a role. But what I'm getting at is sometimes it's really difficult to sort out what we might have done or what somebody else might have done or didn't do, and to go, okay, how much does the responsibility lie? If you want to call it responsibility, because were we conscious of what we were doing? And if we weren't, then we also have to acknowledge that, because it's very important that we do our best not to take on responsibility for something that we weren't conscious of to begin with.
Yeah. What's coming to my mind, Peter, I'm going to the loss of possibilities, and you framed with a relationship, a man and a woman, a man and his partner, etc.
Right.
But what I'm thinking, what you made me think about it was my relationship with my mother.
Okay. All
Right.
right.
And Peter, um, when I was, I don't know, 4,
Mm-hmm.
I told her, I hate you. And of course, she looks at me lovingly and she said, it's okay. I don't hate you. And as I grew up, I projected my own lack, my own absence of something or other,
Mm-hmm.
and made a decision, right? I was quite young. I do not want to ever get married or have children because I don't want to be like you. Look at that. This is really interesting.
Wow.
And as time goes by, and I moved away from my parents, from my family home, my family area, in far away from here. And it was very interesting that um, I felt so much guilt
Mm-hmm.
because I realized, as I am a mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
I The way I used to say was, I was, if I could say she did X, I may have done a fraction of 1% of X in
Mm-hmm.
relationship, how much, what she was, and she has long ago passed, but she was such an amazing person, an amazing individual, a mother that I pale in comparison. And so from that perspective, I could go back, uh, and I recognize in myself to be stuck in the guilt for feeling those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I was able to really reflect upon and understand what is my void that I felt as a child, and what can I do to address the void with my children. And I
Mhm.
tried. If my children are here listening to this, I tried. I love you. I love you immensely, as much as I know that my mother loved me. But what I'm bringing all of this context to tell you that once a while ago, I was part of it was a group family constellation, and it was almost like um, a demo, if you will, but it was in person. This teaching what happens in family constellation as a psychological tool, and it came to me that very interesting. The role that I was going to play was to be my mother,
Okay.
and somebody else was me,
Right.
and that sense of my own guilt for feeling what I felt, right? And for expected more from her. All the things that I said and done, including moving away, staying
Mhm.
away,
Mhm.
in that moment of the family constellation exercise, it came to me as I became a mother, pure
Mhm.
love, no condemnation, no
Mhm.
condemnation whatsoever. And so I think when we pivot to the discussion that we have here, regardless of the scenario, is the loss of a loved one, it is a loss of a relationship, it's the
Mhm.
loss of yourself as you grow up with a very um, challenging emotional response to whomever. It's important that if there is guilt, like you said, what are we doing about it?
Mhm.
Because guilt is a very interesting, um, in my mind's eye, I see guilt as this thermometer, right? It's
Right.
it's red hot. Let's do something about it. Let's remove our coats and sweaters and scarves, and let's turn on the AC, so on and so forth, whatever it is. But it's red hot, which
Mhm.
means there's something that is not quite good in my own sense of my own belief systems, my moral compass, if you will. So I
Mhm.
think where you're going is very good. The self reflections are super important,
Mhm.
but if we're stuck to them, we're unable to forgive ourselves first and foremost,
Right.
and then ask for forgiveness from the other that we feel that we hurt, we damaged somehow.
Mhm. You mentioned before about loss of control, and that's very important when it comes
Yeah,
to guilt, because the
yeah,
fact is, we've all done things that wish we had not done,
yeah,
and we can't undo the past. We cannot control how the other person reacted to something we did,
yeah.
whether we deliberately hurt somebody or perhaps unconsciously hurt somebody, or we cross boundaries in some way. Uh, and part of that inward search is, and again, I'm speaking in broad terms here, but if we hurt somebody, were we trying to be cruel? Did we
Yeah,
take delight in being cruel? Did we really, again, this may be unconscious on our part, but
yeah,
were we angry about something and we took it out on someone in some way? That's, very strong possibility.
yeah,
Um, but when it comes to loss of control, you mentioned causality before. Again, if I
yeah,
just understand, why such and such happened, everything will be fine. What I was trying to say before is sometimes we don't know why people reacted the way they did because maybe they don't want to talk or they don't say everything that they were going through. We don't fully know how somebody else is processing an event that happened that we played a part in. And that can be frustrating, speaking of control,
Yeah.
because, if only we could talk, for instance, or if only I understood, what was that one thing I wish I had done differently? It might have made all the difference in the world. Not necessarily, because how often are people kind of wired in a certain way or geared up in such a way that if they back off or leave or whatever, they were probably going to do that anyways because there was something happening within them
Yeah.
that may have played a big role in that.
Yeah.
But again, that's not my way of saying I should relinquish responsibility. But there is a strong connection between grief and trying to control the things in life that we can't control.
And it's an illusion, right, Peter? It's
It's
truly something that we try to do voluntarily or not, but we try to do it, especially uh, when it hurts, right? It hurts. A grief, whatever is the cause, the sense of loss, it's painful to all of us.
It's one of the most traumatic things that people go through, loss.
Mhm.
Whether
Mhm.
it's loss of a loved one, it's loss of you move from one place to another, and maybe a whole era of your life is coming to an end as a result.
Mhm.
There's those kinds of losses, um, which for some people can be really hard to go through depending upon what it is. Um, people going from one country to another and they're not going to see certain people ever again, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And these things all weigh on us in a variety of ways. So it can be a challenge for any of us to try to, it's not so much about putting the past in perspective, but letting go of
Yeah.
what we can't undo in the first place.
Yeah.
About
Yet, yeah.
yeah,
So go ahead. I just wanted to say,
about
uh,
all we can do is
mm,
to, if there's something we could have done differently, then to be mindful of that, and maybe it'll help us in the present and going into the future. That's all.
absolutely. But
Mhm.
what I wanted to talk about this paradox, because while guilt is not something that I necessarily want to feel, right?
Right, right.
But it feels oddly comfortable, right? And again, it's all about this illusion of control, which means um, the guilt that I keep staying in that state of guilt tells me that I am responsible. Therefore, the world is predictable.
Mhm.
But if something hurts and I don't feel guilt, then life is uncertain, which is something that
Right.
it all goes back to the need for control.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting because it talks about how very generally, broadly speaking, how we humans, right, in our own sense of humanity, it's almost like we prefer pain
Mhm.
with meaning, with a cause,
Mhm.
than the uncertainty that comes when I don't have control. And it's just very interesting. It's quite an existential discussion, right? Which is leads us to think about how to live a life,
Yeah.
to be with someone, be in a
Mhm.
relationship with my mother, being with our whomever, with meaning, right?
Right.
Despite what else. But
I would,
yeah, go ahead.
I also think it's a good idea to distinguish between two general types of guilt.
Okay.
One is genuine guilt, where we really did something wrong and it's kind of obvious. And the other would be, I would say, more of a defensive, even not phony guilt, but guilt that's more of a defense on our part, where
Hmm.
we're automatically feeling guilty about something,
Yeah.
more in the terms of, please don't be angry at me, please don't yell at me, because I didn't take responsibility for something.
Yeah.
And I'm still not taking responsibility, but I'm very guilty, which can then, I would call it manipulative guilt. where I'm
Well, defense
apologizing.
mechanism, right? It's our ego is a master manipulator.
Yes, indeed. So I may I may say, I'm sorry, Marcia, for doing such and such. Please don't be angry with me. And I may get you to go, it's okay, Peter. But what I'm really doing is not taking responsibility for what it was I did in the first
Yeah,
place,
yeah,
either because I don't want to be uncomfortable or I have an almost automatic response of, don't be angry at me, Marcia. Whatever you do,
yeah,
God
yeah,
forbid you should be angry at me. You know, that kind
yeah,
of thing. But also, genuine guilt is a good thing in the sense that it's a wake up call. You know, it gets us to think about what we did, what we could have done differently. It can get us to grow up, to
yeah,
take more responsibility in positive ways. But as you were saying before, if you get into a cycle of guilt, then that's a way of punishing ourselves habitually.
yeah,
And I think Joanna de Ângelis in her books on psychology would emphasize that's one example of psychological immaturity because
yeah.
we're not really confronting our behavior fully.
Can I pivot a little bit into, because we talked about grief, guilt,
Right.
and forgiveness,
Mhm.
and I think key to this when we talk about guilt while we're grieving for the loss of a
Okay.
person, especially,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And there is that deep hurt for the loss, but deep hurt that is driven by that sense of guilt. What did I do? Didn't do? And we know this, right, Peter? There's so many of us who have become estranged from our relatives or our family members, our a long time ago friends that
Mhm.
were inseparable, and we move on, and there's something that was minute perhaps at the time that grows, that was it festers, if you will. But
Yeah.
in any case, my thought here is, can we talk a little bit about self forgiveness, right? What are the tools and the attributes for us to recognize, like you said, reflection are there. So how do we start to to allow ourselves to first forgive ourselves for the errors, for the mistakes, for all that we did not, we omitted in our roles as children, as spouses, as partners, whatever.
Right.
And I would venture to say it is, and you mentioned already, it's not about negligence, right? It's
Mhm.
not about moving away from our sense of responsibility, or
Right.
even this erasure of the memory of the hurt. But what is it? Can you talk a little bit about it, if you don't mind?
Well, um, the past is past, you know, put very simply.
Yeah,
And and because of that, we really can't go back and undo something, you know.
yeah,
I mean, I think my parents are both gone at this point, been gone for quite a while now. And something I get reminded of, for instance, is my father had an extensive photography collection of all kinds of stuff, some of which has some historic interest, I think. I can now think of all kinds of questions I wish I had asked, which is really a way of saying I wish I had known him better. Because
yeah,
I can think of all the times we spent together where we hardly spoke. It wasn't that we were, you know, it wasn't that we didn't enjoy each other's company, but talking comfortably was sometimes a little bit of a struggle. And I look back on things like that and think, God, I wasted time. You know, if
yeah.
I had only known this and this and this and that, I can think of all kinds of questions, you know, or subjects to talk about.
Hmm.
Uh, that's just, you know, one example of where you can't go back and recreate that relationship because the person's not around anymore. So, um,
Well, let's go back from a spiritual insight, right?
mhm,
Because as I love the example of your father, And I love how you put it, right? I wish I had asked,
Mhm.
but below the ask is really, I wish I had known him better. Thank you for sharing. But
Yeah.
from a spiritual perspective, we do know something quite interesting, which is, right, with physical death does not mean that relationships are gone, right?
Right.
So
Sure.
it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Mhm. They do continue from the spiritist perspective.
Hmm.
Uh, so if there's guilt involved in the example I gave, it has more to do with lack of awareness to even ask certain questions in the first place.
Yeah.
It's not like I had no idea that some of this work existed, for instance. It
Yeah.
just didn't occur to me. Now, if I want to look at myself more deeply, I could say I was not really attuned to him enough, and I was more attuned to myself to even ask the questions, things like that. So, um, those kinds of insights can help us to think more about really appreciating who somebody else is
Yeah.
while they're still around.
Yeah.
And um, even if the relationship continues in a different sense, it's not what it was before when the person was physically here.
Yeah. But then from a self-forgiveness, it's important to understand number one,
Mhm.
the bonds of love don't go away, right, with
Right.
physical death. Number one. So this is to me is an absolution of the guilt. But on the other is that self-reflection. And number three
Mhm.
is like you said, I agree. I was just not paying attention, which happens when we are in the path toward psychological and spiritual maturity, right, Peter? That
Yeah.
and it can be through age, but maturity doesn't necessarily have to be age related. It's all about experience related,
Right.
and how we are more or less aware of that. But I think it's so important for all of us, me included, who are going through some sense of guilt for not being there enough.
Mhm.
Self-forgiveness is really an important aspect when we do recognize our own limitations, right?
Mhm.
And our imperfections, all of us,
Yeah.
100% of humanity today, we are imperfect spirits, but we are growing toward that with the notion of perfectibility, that
Right.
we are becoming better and better. But if we knew everything, right, Peter? If we knew everything, life would be quite different than not. So let us give ourselves grace to understand and to forgive, and recognizing perhaps with some of those self-reflections that
Mhm.
we can do better with today, not necessarily the past, but
Right.
today and the future.
Going back to loss of
Mhm,
control, but also I'm going to pivot a little bit
mm,
myself,
mhm,
but try to stay on the same subject, but a different example.
mhm.
What about somebody who commits suicide or somebody
Yeah.
who succumbs to addiction and they don't survive? I remember when I was in college, there was somebody who I didn't really know, uh, but
Yeah.
somebody who committed suicide, and it was done in a very horrible way. I won't go
Mhm,
into details. And I remember another person who I think, in my dormitory at the time, and this person was very upset and angry, not because he knew this person, but because it evoked a loss that this person had experienced. Someone this person knew who did commit suicide. And I think for those who know somebody who did that, or somebody who uh, succumbed to addiction and died from overdose or what have you, there is that feeling of, well, if we'd only done such and such, maybe we could have done this, maybe we could have done that. But the other thing that factors into that, going back to control, is sometimes there's just nothing you can do to stop somebody from driving themselves off the cliff. You just can't. And that can be very hard for people, especially if we feel like, there must be something we can do to save so-and-so from doing such and such. Maybe, but not necessarily. Unfortunately, there are some people that if they are determined to self-destruct, they'll find a way to do it.
Yeah.
But if we even sense that could happen, and it does happen, and maybe we tried to help, maybe we didn't, but that gets into very complicated areas and feelings where, am I a bad person because I didn't do enough to help? Was I indifferent, callous, etc.? So again, going back to the theme of control, we obviously can't stop somebody who's really determined to be self-destructive, and some people just are. From a spiritist perspective, I'm sure this has come up in other episodes in this series about when someone commits suicide from the perspective of reincarnation. This may not be the first time. It could be they've done it multiple times. It may actually be that maybe this time they tried a little harder not to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Can be some consolation, but from the perspective of guilt, the person witnessing this may feel like, gosh, if only we had done this, if only we had done that.
It is very hard, right? The so-called those, and I am doing air quote here, right? Those left behind for that type of loss. It's an incredible journey of self recrimination, of self blame. And those ruminations become quite strong, and it may take an entire lifetime of what if I had paid more attention? What if I did not allow that person to stay alone while we're traveling? There's so many what ifs, right? And I think it's important that perhaps we move away, Peter, in any case, but especially in those traumatic losses such as suicide, that we forgive ourselves, that we ask for forgiveness, because the person who left, they can hear us, they can feel our pain and sorrow, and perhaps the best thing is to, instead of focusing on how we may have failed them, but how can we honor them from now on, right? Do I need a little bit like, let's say there is that famous actor, Michael J. Fox, who brilliant actor, and he's been going through Parkinson's for majority of his life. And he has no shame on talking about the ravages to his body that such an illness causes, but he's also an advocate for example, his family who stayed with him, for the foundation that he created, so on and so forth. So maybe that's what we can think about it. How can I honor that person who left in a relationship, in a role, my mother, right? Or those who left
the more we are conscious of what we learned from that relationship, that's one way to honor someone. By perhaps being mindful of things we could do differently going forward, which we talked about before. This is where praying for that person, certainly, since Spiritism emphasizes the continuation of the spirit. Prayer it does matter from that perspective, because the spirit world is so driven by thought. And so, or even pray for someone who's still here, still incarnate, but maybe we had a falling out with that person.
Yeah.
We may feel guilty about things we could have done differently, but we can also pray for that person.
Yeah. And for ourselves, we can pray for ourselves. I
Absolutely.
wish I am stronger. And Peter, in that, with that vein of thoughts, you talked about spiritist thoughts about the immortality of the soul of the spirit.
Mhm.
Therefore, upon physical death, it doesn't mean that the one that we love so much is gone. It's still there. But the question here is, do we think that, in this, I'm saying this, of course, I'm thinking of my mother in that family constellation experiment.
Mhm.
Do you
Okay.
think those who passed expect and rejoice upon our guilt?
I hope not.
They don't, right? And you say, I hope not, because they could be not so advanced spirits, but no,
All right.
absolutely not.
No.
Especially
No.
those relationships that are very strong, a
Mhm.
partner, a child, a parent, so on and so forth, right?
They let's Yeah, I don't think they do. I think you're absolutely right. But suppose somebody does take
Yeah,
the life of our guilt. That says more about them than it does about us.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
we have to
Uh,
keep that in mind too. If somebody thrives on the guilt of others, then they too bear a huge responsibility.
yeah,
But
yeah,
as we like to say in Spiritism, or at least I think one of the big messages of Spiritism is somebody else's journey, spiritual journey, is between them and God.
yeah, yeah,
And whatever happens, happens going forward. And, you know,
yeah.
you wish that person well. But if that person likes to, make others feel guilty and really let them have it and all that, then they're going to have to, the consequences of that, whatever they may be, will have to run its course. So,
Yeah, I want to propose something, Peter. And my proposal here is to shift our mindset. All of us who are suffering the guilt and grieving for some loss.
mhm.
The proposal here is for all of us to promise ourselves to transform our if only I had done, said, whatever, yeah, if only into from now on, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes there are unsaid words,
Right.
there are unmet commitments, but we can take the stance of looking into our feelings of guilt within the grieving process
Mhm.
to say, for example, if I withheld my love, expressing my love with my father, for instance, well,
Mhm.
express it now, right? As we know, love continues,
Right.
but we can really move from if only into from now on saying, uh, well, I didn't say I love you enough.
Mhm.
Well, let's express love more
Right.
consciously, intentionally, more frequently, right? And I just think it's all about an intention to be aware of what we missed and make it a practice, make it a habit, right?
Right.
I think this is quite interesting for all of us to think about it.
Yeah. I'll put it this way, kind of
Mhm.
rephrasing it a little bit. If we feel guilty about something and we have good reason to feel guilty to some extent, then if we really have regrets about it, then don't repeat it.
Mhm.
Don't
Yeah,
repeat that with somebody else.
yeah,
So
yeah,
what you were just saying, basically.
yeah.
Um,
I want us to wrap up with maybe some touch points because this was a quite interesting conversation, Peter. And I just want to thank you and thank all of our listeners here with us today.
mhm.
But let me just I'm not ruminate. I'm going to regurgitate our thoughts, right? Because the first question was why do we feel guilt when
Hmm.
I am grieving? And from a psychological perspective, the guilt that I'm feeling is not accidental. It is functional when we think about our mind trying to reconstruct, give a sense of why, right? What happened? Could I have prevented it? Am I still connected to the sense of doom of not having been responsible enough? And as I mentioned, let's be aware of that thinking that if only I had, which is really ineffective, or the rumination, that repetitive mental loops, as we talked about it,
Hmm.
or the self-blame, which you mentioned quite well. We are not responsible for somebody else's journey, right?
Right.
Influence, but we're not responsible. And then
Yeah.
we talked about something that was very interesting, which is that illusion of control, beautifully explained by you. And that illusion is really interesting because it's almost magical thinking, right? Oh yeah, I should have done more. Oh yeah, I could have done more. Oh yeah, I could have controlled the outcome from that relationship. And this is interesting because it brings about that hindsight bias, right?
Right.
Well, duh, you
Uh,
now with 30 years you can look back and go through those reflections, but not at the time. Or another type of cognitive psychology concept, which is personalization, which means I am so self-centered that I'm taking excessive responsibility for something that shouldn't be so.
right.
So, as we wrap it up, do you have any final thought that you would like to bring
Well,
to
yeah,
us?
just to kind of summarize very quickly,
Mm-hmm,
the positive thing about guilt is that it can definitely be a wake-up call.
mm-hmm,
So it's opening the door to consciousness. It's not meant to be a trap. And so the more if we feel guilty about something, use that as an opportunity to search inward and make changes. If we have to not repeat something we did, then do that. If
yeah,
we're taking on responsibility that's really not ours in the first place, then we need to understand that that too is a lesson, important one. So again, use if since we all have feelings of guilt, use it as an entryway to deepen our awareness of who we are in the first place.
yeah, very good. So, for me, learning from you, Peter, I say that guilt tells us that we feel that we could have been perfect.
Mhm.
We're not.
We're not.
And the beautiful sense of love that surrounds us, the love agape, right?
Right.
Love from our loving Father. There's a sense of mercy, of love,
Mhm.
of a reminder that we were just human. Yes, we may have not been perfect, but guess what? We are not perfect, right? So let us all be very mindful that and forgive ourselves. We don't need to forget, just
Right.
forgive and remember to be graceful, to be tender with ourselves and those that we love.
I like what you said about self-love in that case. If guilt becomes an entryway to deepened spiritual self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
then it's an act of self-love. In other words, if we have a positive outcome where after starting to feel guilty about something, that's a victory. That's self-love.
Oh, wow. Very good. Good final words. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up for today. And for those of you who perhaps is coming to see our episode for the first time, please note that our program is Psychology and Spirituality. It is a weekly program. They're all based on the works by Joanna de Ângelis, and we appreciate you. We also appreciate our sponsors, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil. Peter, thank you so very much for being here with us. And so long. I'd love to come back with you to talk
Okay.
about this topic that is so rich. Thank
It's a
you,
deal.
and so long.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. So long. Bye-bye.